Hello, Sunshine. I'm Alexi Lalas, and welcome to the State of the Union podcast, where we look at the beautiful game on and off the field through the lens of red, white, and blue-colored glasses. This episode, we'll be talking to, the great Doug McIntyre will be stopping by. We'll be talking U.S. men's national team versus Mexico. Again, Holland. Arsenal breaking up. Ooh, best U.S. men's national team coach in history. Julie Ertz so good. Nouveau Riche versus OG MLS clubs. Washington Crossing, and so much more. But first, joining me, as always, my friend, my colleague, my guiding light, David Mosse, a soccer savant and a Fox Soccer researcher and writer extraordinaire. Mosse, how you doing on this Monday, April 17th in the year 2023?
I am doing well, although this past weekend I was not David Mosse. I became Charles Edward Dahl, a carpenter from Adelaide, Australia.
What, I have no idea what you're talking about. Explain this to me.
Saturday was the anniversary of the Titanic sinking.
Okay. Did you celebrate or something?
April 15, 1912, so 111 years ago. So I attended the Titanic exhibit here in Los Angeles.
Ooh.
It's also going on in New York. I recommended it to my parents. It was very cool. And the way it works is when you buy your quote-unquote ticket for the exhibit, they actually give you a boarding pass of somebody who was on the Titanic.
Oh, my God.
So I got this guy, Charles Edward Dahl from Adelaide, Australia, who survived, by the way. Third-class passenger survived. But very cool. I recommend it. Tons of artifacts, and you learn a lot of history about the building of the ship. And then, obviously, each room is sort of like built like a compartment in the ship. And then ultimately you learn about the tragedy and what the aftermath was. So I was on a big Titanic kick.
Are there artifacts in this, or is it just set up? Like you said, it's in New York too. How can it be in both places at the same time?
It's like what the type of china they would have used on that ship, not the actual one, but
so it's an experience.
Yes,
if you will.
Everything is sort of a recreation.
Got it. All right. Well, that's a great recommendation. That actually sounds kind of cool. I would like to check. Did you read anything or watch anything?
Well, you'll be happy to know J'ai fini le livre.
J'ai fini?
Yeah.
Okay.
About the book about the Israeli spy, Eli Cohen. So I was also on kind of a big Israeli spy Mossad kick this weekend, watched a couple of documentaries. But now I've got it out of my system so I can move on with my life.
You're going to read some stuff in English now going forward? And what about, my wife was screaming and yelling about Succession again, so that continues on, right?
Yes. So this was the episode after the death of a major character, so it was kind of the aftermath of that. So another very compelling episode. We're hitting the home stretch here, only 6 left.
Only 6 left. Oh, I can't even contain myself. Okay, let's see. What am I doing here? Just finishing up a book called Washington's Crossing about Washington's Crossing of the Delaware. It's by David Hackett Fisher. So that's interesting from an American history perspective, and I just gobble it up. I love it all. It actually, it talks about some of the fighting that was going on because it gives a prelude to the actual crossing and the facts relative to it, also the myths relative to it, but it goes up and down that eastern seaboard and even goes into Princeton and New Brunswick where my alma mater Rutgers is, and talks about the Raritan and the fighting back and forth. So it was really interesting to hear how they just kind of went up and down that East Coast in a lot of these places that I would go and watch bands play in were scenes of revolutionary type of conflict. So that's cool. And then they can't always be great, Mosse. But when you turn on, so for example, I turned on Netflix and they have recommendations that pop up. And if I'm not going to specifically watch something, chances are I'm going to look at what they recommend. I'm not always going to go for it, but I pull it up and the first thing that I see is something called The Snowman. Well, I think, it says drama, serial killer type of thing. So I'm into it. Let me check it out. And it's a piece of crap. All right. It should be called Snow Crap. Okay. And yet it's one of these things, and I know you know the phenomenon. We only see oftentimes the great performances of some of these great actors. And sometimes we don't recognize that they are often off doing other productions and other movies that back in the day we would say it goes straight to video, right? That don't get the fanfare and don't have the money behind it and certainly don't get the accolades that others do. When I look at this, for example, this is a Scandinavian production and it all happens in, I think it's Sweden or Norway, and it's out in the snow. But Michael Fassbender's in it. Val Kilmer is in it. J.K. Simmons is in it. Toby Jones is in it. Chloe Sevigny, I can't pronounce the last name, is in it. These are all people that you will have seen that have done incredible work. Some are Oscar winners here. And obviously, they were, given the money. And this happened in 2017, this movie. But it is a horrible, horrible movie. I cannot tell you how horrible it is. And I hopefully am steering you away from it. But it just goes to show that, if you don't have a good story and a good script, it doesn't matter how good the actors are. And actors are, that's their job, and they will take the money and they will do whatever. And this is not the only one. There are plenty of movies out there where you go, how the hell did that person get involved in that movie? Well, I'll tell you how. They paid him or her a lot of money. They took the money. They did what they needed to do, and then they went off the other way. So don't watch The Snowman if you pull up Netflix, and it will recommend that you watch it. So horrible. Should we light this candle, my friend?
Let's do it.
Because we have another special guest, another week with special guests. We have the great Doug McIntyre. And so let's not mess around. Let's just get right to him, shall we? All right. Okay, without further ado, let's welcome in the great Doug McIntyre to talk all things on and off the field when it comes to American soccer and beyond. There he is. There's his beautiful face shining and his shiny gold microphone from parts unknown right now, the great Doug McIntyre. Welcome back to the State of the Union. All right, Doug, let's get right into it here. We live in interesting times, shall we say, when it comes to the U.S. men's national team. As we know, in a few days from now, they will be playing a game against Mexico. I think I tweeted out this morning that, there's 1,200 days until the 2026 Men's World Cup. There's 90 days until the Gold Cup. There's a couple days until this Mexico game. So things are happening, but they still have not filled these positions. Whether it is the Ernie Stewart role as the sporting director over all the national teams, whether it's the Brian McBride role as the GM of the national team, or obviously the coach, Anthony Hudson, in an interim capacity right now. Just take us through quick. Have I missed something? Where are we? Are we in stasis right now when it comes to the U.S. men's national team?
No, I don't. Hi, first of all, thanks for having me, guys. No, I don't think you missed anything. I don't know how quick. Quick is the word here, right? Like, yep. We're months after Ernie Stewart left his position, and still, radio silence from U.S. Soccer. We haven't heard much coming out of there. They're keeping the information close to the chest. There's been a few leaks, mostly people that don't want the sporting director job, and that's the first one that has to be filled, I think, before we get to the coach. But the clock is ticking, Lexi. So it's something where I think U.S. Soccer's timeline is to name a coach before the Women's World Cup. That begins in July. Again, we're into late April now. And talking to JT Batson end of last month, just before the U.S. played El Salvador in the Nations League, he said that timeline is still in place. But something interesting that I learned is that part of the holdup might be that the folks they're looking at and the interview process has been ongoing. They're whittling down the group. This could be a situation where the holdup is because the person or persons they're interested in are still under contract. So there's been a few folks whose names have come up. Aguchi Onyewu, which I reported. A guy you played with, Lexi, Tab Ramos, is another name that I've heard express interest in this job. I think the same with Onyewu. These are guys that could be signed right now if U.S. Soccer wanted to. So reading the tea leaves, it makes me think that this position is going to be filled by someone that has a job, and we've seen with some of the other names that are out there, Mike Jacobs, Ernst Tanner, Peter Vermees. These are all folks that are currently in positions and in theory would have to get out of a contract in order to take this U.S. Soccer job before July. So I think that's part of the holdup. There's no reason to think that it's going to go any longer than that at this stage. But there was also some optimism, a month, even 2 months ago, that it could happen a lot sooner than that, and obviously that hasn't happened yet.
Well, hold on. Is it your understanding that both of those positions, the sporting director that we know Ernie Stewart held, which was responsible for all of the national teams, and the GM, because we know that when Kate Margrath came in as the GM specifically of the women's side, is there going to be a consolidation or a separation of those two? Will both of those jobs still exist, do you think, come the summer, the sporting director and a GM for the men's national team, and then obviously a coach for the national team?
Yeah, I don't think so, Lexi. I mean, again, U.S. Soccer has not confirmed this, but again, the writing is on the wall. I don't think the GM position is going to be something on the men's side that there is, and if there is, it might look different. So I don't, obviously Brian McBride, didn't leave to take another job. His contract was not renewed. He actually signed a 1-month extension to get them through the January camp, and he's gone now. So that there's no reason he couldn't have been extended if he wanted to stay, which by all accounts he seemed to want to stay. So I don't think we're going to have a GM on the men's side come the summer, but obviously again, the sporting director is the job that gets filled first, and I think they're working through all those things. But I think there will not be a GM on the men's side. That's my feeling.
Doug, 2-part question. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Based on what you've been able to gather, had the Berhalter reign of Michigas not occurred, would Gregg Berhalter have been retained as the U.S. coach? And in light of everything that's gone on, do you think there's any chance Gregg Berhalter is rehired?
That's 2 questions, Mosse, but that's okay. Good to see you, man. Yeah, so I think to answer the first question, Gregg Berhalter would have been back if this hadn't happened. I mean, before the U.S. left Qatar, there were rumblings that there had been informal conversations about retaining him, and our friend Jeff Carlisle at ESPN reported after the U.S. After that those those conversations had taken place, even in a more formal basis, but still very early on in the process. And then the whole Reina Berhalter stuff came out, and obviously that put a pause on things. And to answer your second question, Mosse, I was with you guys where, as much as U.S. Soccer has said that Gregg Berhalter remains a candidate, they've said that repeatedly. They said that, pending the outcome of the independent investigation that was conducted, that if his name was cleared, essentially there was no other things that was found in that report, that he would remain a candidate. And indeed, when it came out, they said yes, he still is in the mix. So I disagree. I think that it was very unlikely at that point, as much as they want to say he's still in the running, that he would be retained. The more time goes on, and the more you have people like Christian Pulisic come out and say, we think this was unfair, that we think Gregg did a good job. I just wonder if potentially there, behind the scenes, if there are enough of those conversations going on, if the high profile players on this team, talk to the new sporting director and say, look, we really believe that this is the right guy for the job. Not that the new sporting director is going to make decisions based solely on what players say, but I think that having that input is going to be important. I still think it's incredibly unlikely. I really do. I think that JT Batson in particular doesn't want that sort of baggage going forward, and I understand that. But I think the door is open a little bit more than it was, say, 2 months ago.
Now, you recently put together a list for Fox Sports of potential front office candidates, everyone from John Thorrington to Oliver Bierhoff. Let's say you, Doug McIntyre, were hired as the general manager and you got to pick the next coach. Who would be your ideal choice?
Yeah, I love these questions. Again, I've sort of, based my entire career on, my opinion doesn't matter. I'm trying to figure out what the people whose opinions matter are thinking, are doing. But I'll play the sporting director for a second. I think it's Jesse Marsch. I think that the fact that he's available, you look at his, his pedigree, the places he's coached. He's a modern coach. Certainly not so much success at Leeds United and RB Leipzig, his last 2 jobs. That is concerning. I think there are legitimate concerns about his playing style. If he's too rigid, if he can be adaptable, if he can be pragmatic. He's a romantic, as Alexi always says, and he's very married to that sort of high press Red Bull system. He's used it everywhere. And even when things haven't gone well, he's stuck with it. So I wonder about that. But as we know, very charismatic guy. I think if he gets into a room and he's asked that question, he'll be able to explain why it's something that the U.S. Soccer shouldn't worry about. And again, availability, the best availability is availability. And he's unattached at the moment. And we know, and I know you guys have talked about it, that, he turned down the Southampton job, linked to the Leicester job, didn't take that, which, like you said on the last pod, Mosse, seemed to be a much better situation than the Southampton job in particular. And he still doesn't end up there. So he's on record saying he would love the opportunity to coach his home country on home soil in the World Cup in 2026. And as long as he's available, he's the front runner for me.
This stasis, it makes it challenging and difficult to a certain extent to assess the team. And look, we have a U.S.-Mexico game coming up in a couple of days, and it's our job to look and to assess and to have our opinions on it. But I was with Anthony Hudson at the Gold Cup draw, and you could even see in his eyes that yes, this is an opportunity, but it's an artificial type of moment for everybody. How much are you looking, for example, at this Mexico game in a couple of days, and then even the Gold Cup, because it might not even be done by the Gold Cup, and how much stock should we put into who's getting called in, how well they play, any type of progress that you see, if it's all going to potentially be blown up later on in the summer when these hires are made.
Yeah, I don't put too much stock into it. You look at the game on Wednesday against Mexico. It's funny, folks online calling it El Cachico. We know that it's going to sell out. It's that wonderful stadium in Glendale. U.S.-Mexico games are always entertaining. They're always fun to watch. It's almost like LAFC, Galaxy. It doesn't matter what the stakes are, whether it's a knockout game or it's a friendly. These games are intense. It's a great opportunity for young players in the U.S. player pool to show what they have to put themselves in the running for the Gold Cup. But to your point, Alexi, yeah, the fact that we don't know who the coach is, I mean, does any of this matter come September, October, when we all think that a new coach will be in place? I'm not so sure, but players, they get called in. It's a national team game. You go and you put your best foot forward. Brandon Vasquez, for instance, scores a hat trick. That's something that the new coach is going to look at when he's considering calling him up in the future. So, these are still, this is still a game that I think matters, but not as much as it would if we knew who the head coach for the next three odd years is going to be.
Doug, one more newsy item I have to ask you about. What have you been able to ascertain regarding Folarin Balogun? We know he flew to Orlando when the U.S. was playing El Salvador there. He evidently met with the U.S. coaching staff. How did those conversations go? How likely is it that he ultimately chooses the U.S.?
It's a really interesting one, Mosse. There's a few things here. So I thought it was very interesting that players, when asked about Balogun during the March camp, that by all accounts he came down to and met with folks. Matt Turner, the guy saying that if this guy, if any player is going to join our team, it has to be for the right reasons. Their heart has to be in it. So I think that's interesting because even Balogun's comments have sounded more like, he's focused on his career and on the fact that he didn't get the opportunity with England's senior team. He's obviously been a part of their 21s, but I don't think it was coincidental that he left England's 21 camp when Marcus Rashford withdraws from the senior England team and Gareth Southgate decides there's not going to be a replacement for him. This is a guy that's scoring left and right in the French league. Probably, I'm sure he thinks he's earned a call-up. And he has to know what the striker situation is for the U.S. team, that there's an opening there potentially, and that he could be playing in big-time games. There's a Copa America next summer that, then he could be a starting striker for the U.S. team, for a team that's already qualified for the World Cup. All those things. So certainly a great opportunity, but I do think that the U.S. has done absolutely everything it possibly can to convince this guy, to recruit this guy. But again, you don't want to go too far because it has to come from the guy. He has to want to, be willing to, go play a Nations League game in Grenada, which the U.S. team did last month. There's a lot more to playing for the U.S. men's national team than there is just suiting up for World Cup games or Copa America games or even Gold Cup games. So by all accounts, it looks like, that there's a real chance that the U.S. lands this player. But I also, part of me in the back of my mind, I wonder if Balogun is trying to use the U.S. as leverage to increase his stock, increase his standing on the England side. And that's a tricky thing. That's something that could end up rubbing both national teams, both fan bases the wrong way. But this is a quality player, and he is U.S. eligible. And the U.S. is doing the right thing by, pulling out the stops to see if he'll commit to the program, because certainly he's a player that can help them in the years to come.
Yeah, you want the player to meet you halfway. Look, we've talked about 2026, and that certainly is going to be a focal point. But This summer, there's all sorts of stuff going on. I know you're going to join us down in Australia and New Zealand for the historic attempt from the U.S. Women's National Team to win 3 World Cups in a row, something unprecedented, never been done men's or women's side. And then obviously we mentioned the Gold Cup. Before we move on to the women's side, players like Gio Reyna, players like Christian Pulisic, players like Ricardo Pepi. This summer may be interesting for them. What are you hearing out there about potential movement and some of the other things that we should be keeping in mind that go beyond the actual 90 minutes of seeing these players play for the U.S. men's national team in friendlies and or Gold Cups?
Yeah, I think it's a little early, Lexi. We're still obviously in April, but there are going to be a number of important U.S. players on the move over the summer. Weston McKennie, guy who's on loan with Leeds, he's going to go back to Juventus. You would think, does he stay there? Certainly, the Juventus was willing to let him leave halfway through the season and go on loan. Pulisic, I think we all think is going to be on the move. Gio Reyna, even though he scored a really good goal for Dortmund over the weekend, we've seen his playing time almost evaporate with them. So I think there are going to be lots of moves. Serginho Dest, who you guys spoke about on the last pod, very clear that he's not in Milan's plans. He's on loan there. Obviously, was allowed to come in for this friendly, which isn't a good look. I agree with you, Mosse. But Barcelona is his parent club. As long as Xavi's the coach there, he does not seem to be in their plans either. So. These are all key players, automatic starters for the U.S. guys that started at the World Cup. And I even think you could see someone like Anthony Robinson, a guy who was also excellent at the World Cup. He's had a very, very good season at Fulham. He's a left back. It's not just the U.S. men's national team that has struggled filling that position over the years. It's a position that there's not a lot of great ones out there in the world. He was linked and actually had a transfer to AC Milan a few years ago fall through because he had a heart ailment, and if that hadn't happened, he would have been there. So I think that's a guy that we could see move on to bigger and better things. That are, again, a very good season in the Premier League this year. So we'll see a bunch of intrigue, transfer speculation, as we always do. But I think even more so this summer for U.S. Players than we have in years past.
One last men's question from me, then we can pivot to the women. What did you hear about the dynamic between Gio Reyna and his teammates during that last U.S. camp? Was he welcomed back with open arms? Or, as you mentioned, there are players like Christian Pulisic who are big fans of Gregg Berhalter. So are there still some fences that need to be mended there?
I think it's a fair question, Mosse. It's something where I think everyone was on their best behavior. Gio Reyna certainly was. And as you've said many, many times, Alexi, players want to win. And everyone knows how good a player Gio Reyna is, and he will help this team, and that buys you a lot of slack. I mean, I am sure, and I know that some U.S. players are still not happy about what went on in Qatar with Gio Reyna at all. They really, that's something that shouldn't happen at that level. I mean, Christian Pulisic has said that publicly. Didn't mention Gio Reyna by name, but you could tell from his comments that there's still some baggage there. But I don't think it's anything insurmountable. And I haven't heard that there were any issues whatsoever at the last camp. Gio Reyna came in, he played in both games, started the second game. I think for him, getting on the field and getting back with the team was really important. Didn't have his best 2 games, but just sort of putting the past behind him. And look, some of the stuff that happened was not Gio Reyna's fault. I mean, he's not responsible for the behavior of his parents, but this is a black mark on him for a long time. It will be at club level. It will be with the national team. And it's just something that over time, that's something that's going to have to be repaired, and, still a young player. And I think that everyone's going to get over it. But and I don't expect any lingering bad feelings. But I think there's still a wariness a little bit on both sides, and will be for at least through this summer.
All right, let's pivot to the women's side and the U.S. women's national team for a few more questions before we let you go. And we really thank you for your time here. As I mentioned, you'll be down with us covering the Women's World Cup down in Australia and New Zealand. Interesting moment for Vlatko Andonovski and company right now as they get ready. One more game before the actual World Cup, and we hear and we saw the return of Julie Ertz. Where do you think this U.S. women's team is right now relative to that feat of possibly winning three in a row? I mean, we put them up on a pedestal, and we have very high expectations, and I think fairly so given their history and the talent and the depth that they have, and that depth certainly is being tested now with Swanson out up top. But just in totality right now, where are you sensing this team is right now, a few months away from the World Cup?
Yeah, I think the big question mark is in the attack. It's certainly with Swanson out. I mean, the 2 games against Ireland, they score 2 goals from the run of play. The second one was a cross. It wasn't a shot. It's a goalkeeper's error. It goes in the net. And Ireland is not a team that's going to challenge the U.S. for the world title. They're at the World Cup. They're a good team. I was very impressed by them, by the way. But that's not, we've come to expect the U.S. to beat teams like that by multiple goals. And I know, again, listen to the interview with Ali Wagner, the women's game has changed. Maybe that's on us looking at history and how dominant this U.S. team has been over the years. They're not going to blow everyone out all the time. It's still going to happen, but it's not going to be something that happens every game. That said, I like their chances. I really do. And, I went into the last World Cup in France. I was there as well. And the U.S. had lost to France, who was seen as their biggest rival and challenger for the trophy. They lost to him earlier that year. We looked at how the bracket played out. We knew there was going to be that big quarterfinal match against France in Paris. And I thought, I think they're not going to win this one. And of course they did. And I'm not going to make that mistake twice. I mean, I think the U.S. team they're so incredibly deep. And for me, they're even deeper than they were 4 years ago. You've seen the likes of Naomi Girma. You've seen Sophia Smith, who's established herself as an automatic starter for this team. Wasn't around, hadn't made her debut this time 4 years ago. You look at Trinity Rodman. You look at the depth that they have, and it's just really hard for me to think that there's any team that can come close to matching that depth. I think the group is really interesting. The fact that they have the Netherlands in the group they played in the second game, a rematch of the last final. That could get interesting because if the Netherlands win that game, and they're capable, and of course, just because you have a slip up in the group stage doesn't mean you can't go on to win a World Cup. We've seen that on the men's side time and time again through the years. But if the U.S. doesn't finish first in that group, I think if they tie with goal difference, they would have the tiebreaker. I think they're going to score more goals than the Netherlands are on Portugal, on Vietnam. But that game, if the U.S. loses that game and they end up finishing second in the group, then I think things get a bit more tricky for them. But I have to say, I really do like their chances. I think there's this young generation of players that's coming up, led by Sophia Smith, and it's really unfortunate for Mallory Swanson because she was going to be a breakout star. This was going to be her moment where she's a household name in the U.S. and beyond, the way Alex Morgan was after the World Cup in 2011. So that part's unfortunate. But if any team in the world is able to, get over a loss like that, it's this U.S. team, and it's more opportunities for some other incredibly talented players to make their mark this summer.
Is Julie Ertz starting come the World Cup? That first game of the World Cup?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
Mosse, I know Mosse's got a bone to pick with you.
Doug, you recently put together for Fox Sports a list of 25 reasons to be excited for the Women's World Cup, and one of them was Germany as an underdog. Germany is ranked number 2 in the world. They were runners-up at the Euros. They've won 2 Women's World Cups. And what's amusing about this is prior to the last Men's World Cup, you also identified Germany as your dark horse. You were ridiculed for that. It almost destroyed your career, and yet you're going down this well again. What is it with you and Germany as an underdog?
It's funny. I think Germany, they're so efficient and they're so boring. And I know I'm playing into some stereotypes here, but you forget about them sometimes. You forget how good they are. I mean, everyone talking on the women's side, like you look at France, you look at the drama that they've had on the field. Some other teams as well. Canada, the defending Olympic champion, rival for the U.S., North American rival. So when you're talking about the teams that can challenge the U.S. for the title, it just seems to me that nobody's talking about Germany, and that's just ridiculous to me because, to your point, they're historically they are the U.S. women's national team of the world in particular. Their record in the European Championships, I mean, they've won 8 titles, more than anybody else, and to me they're the biggest threat for the U.S. team this year, and no one's mentioning them. No one's talking about them. We've heard England that this is their time, and of course Germany and England played in the Euros, and England was able to get through. But for me, forget England. Germany, I think, is the team that the U.S. really needs to be worried about. Not taking anything away from from England, although I think they are still unproven at the top level. And there's a big difference between playing England in a friendly at Wembley and playing them in the World Cup. Of course, the U.S. lost to England last October in a friendly over there. But yes, so Germany shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. They're a really good team. They're one of the favorites to win this World Cup, and I'm surprised that we haven't heard more about them compared to some of the other title contenders that could stop this historic achievement by the U.S. this summer.
All right. Well, despite Mosse's protestations and just complete disgust at least one of the 25 things, reasons to be excited about for the Women's World Cup, you should check out Doug's article with the 25, according to Mosse, 24, at least good reasons to be excited about the Women's World Cup. Before I let you go, I asked this of the actor Brendan Hunt a couple weeks ago when we had him on the show. I'm interested talking to people like yourself that have been around and have seen the sport grow on and off the field and, take different directions, good, bad, up, down, stuff like that. What is, and again, you're going to have to give your opinion here. I know you like to say my job's to get other people's opinions to analyze that, but you're going to have to give your opinion here. What is the best thing about the American soccer fan community, and what is the worst thing?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Can I give the same answer for both? Is that a
sure,
cop-out?
Absolutely. No, it's not a cop-out, but explain yourself.
For sure. So I think that the passion of the U.S. fan is really interesting to me, because you have a group that is there is an insecurity, guys. I think that goes back a long way of wanting to be at the level of other countries around the world. We know how much progress the sport has made in the U.S. over the last 30 odd years. But we also know how far it still has to go. So there's this weird thing where, U.S. fans are very proud of that progress, but they also want more. And it sort of manifests itself in, complaining about every little thing, complaining about whoever the coach of the national team is. And by the way, whoever becomes the coach of the team, whether it's, Jose Mourinho or Patrick Vieira or Jesse Marsch or Jim Curtin, they're going to get slaughtered online on a weekly basis. And that's normal. I think that's something we see in quote unquote real soccer countries around the world. And I think the US is getting closer to that, but it is sort of annoying to me how toxic it can be, because there has been so much progress. And I understand everyone wants to take the next step and everyone wants to, to see the sport reach its potential. And I think it will eventually. But the negativity sometimes is a little off-putting. I try to be an optimistic person in life, and so to see every little thing poo-pooed all the time, maybe I spend too much time online, but that could be annoying. I think people need to have a little bit more perspective sometimes, but I do admire the passion, and it cuts both ways. So that's my opinion. I hope I answered that.
No, you did. No, actually, it's a great answer, and I completely agree with a lot of things you said. I think people online and others, even to your face, would say that one person's toxicity is another person's passion, as you mentioned, and so maybe it's somewhere in the middle there. The great Doug McIntyre, thank you so much for coming on. I know there was some back and forth and some concern as to Mosse was calling you out about not coming on the show and you made it very, very clear that you are completely open to coming on the show, and that's why we wanted to have you on for a number of different reasons, including that, and obviously your great work that you do on a consistent basis when it comes to all the soccer here at Fox, and you will continue to do as we get closer and closer to this summer and Major League Soccer and the Gold Cup, and as we mentioned, the Women's World Cup. So hopefully at some point later on this summer we will see you in person, my friend. Go back and do the great work that you are doing, and we look forward to reading all of it as it comes out throughout the summer and throughout the years. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks for having me, guys, and thanks for putting that on the record, Lexi. There can be no denying it from here on out. So anytime. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks again to Doug McIntyre for all of his incredible knowledge, and we look forward to speaking to him again soon. All right. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we got all sorts of MLS action that's happening and European action that has happened and is going to happen and all sorts of stuff that we need to talk about. Don't go anywhere. Okay. Welcome back. All right. Let's take a trip around all the domestic soccer that is going on. Let's start with some MLS stuff, right? Shall we, Mosse?
St. Louis back on track.
Back, baby. I told you they would be back.
After 2 straight defeats, they hammer Cincinnati 5-1. Stroud and Joe McKennie among the goal scorers.
Yeah, there was this 2-hour weather break, and that can play, with your mind for any type of play you're waiting around. But obviously, it didn't affect. First off, the fans in St. Louis. They were there in force, and they waited around to see their beloved team. And the team rewarded them and came out and put a whooping on Cincinnati. And by the way, this is a Cincinnati team that's sitting up there at the top. And while we have talked about how they've grinded out results, this was done. And again, somebody asked me earlier today about St. Louis and if this is sustainable. Well, first off, you have to define what this is. Despite what you may read or what people tell you, it's not as if St. Louis has reinvented the wheel. But they do what they do very, very well. All right, the pressing is consistent, it is confident, and ultimately it is effective. The designated players have come to play and are providing on a consistent basis, and the star name players that they have, and then the supporting cast. You mentioned Stroud or others are chipping in and doing well, and that is the recipe for, at the very least, a competitive team. I think they're already more than a competitive team. I do think that this is sustainable in that they are going to, be involved and be competitive throughout. I don't think that they are an elite team, and I don't think that it's sustainable in terms of them staying at the top of the league for the entire regular season. But this is not an anomaly. This is not just oh my goodness, this is an expansion team. Nobody knows how to deal with it. And they had that little blip with 2 losses in a row, and they come right back against a very, very good Cincinnati team, because that was the other thing. It's like, well, wait till they actually play somebody that's going to know what they are about. But they're not missing a beat, and it's great to see from a soccer perspective and from a cultural perspective what it means to St. Louis.
On the Cincinnati front, can I put my Brazilian hat on
Absolutely.
for 1 second? It was announced in the last few days that Cincinnati has agreed a deal to sell Brenner to Udinese. So he will be off to Italy when the transfer window in Europe opens in the summer. A couple thoughts here. I do wonder what this means for Brandon Vasquez, because he is also attracting interest, Borussia Mönchengladbach among others. But I wonder, would they sell both Brenner and Vasquez? That to me is then waving a white flag on a season that looks quite promising. So I wonder if they would part with both.
Well, it's hard because on the one hand, you want to have proof of concept. You want to establish that pathway that shines as a beacon for others that are potentially wanting to come and use it as a platform to show their wares and then to go on to quote unquote bigger and better things. But you also have a responsibility to the people that are paying money to your club to see the team. And if that team that is marketed and sold and promised then is blown up in the middle of the season, I think that can cause problems. And look, this is not anything new. This is a balance that MLS teams have to figure out, because if you do have that bird in the hand, and from a practical perspective, there is money out there to be had that then theoretically doesn't always work, but theoretically you can then pour in and restock. You kind of have to do it because who knows, injuries or form and all that kind of stuff. But if it comes along this summer, I think they're going to do it.
We talk about this strategy of MLS teams signing young South American players and then serving as that bridge to Europe. And I'm sure in some quarters, Brenner will be held up as another successful execution of that strategy. But I don't know. It reminds me of in college basketball, coaches love to tout how many players they put in the NBA. But there are some cases where a hotshot recruit comes in, he never buys into being in college, and he leaves at the first opportunity, and you come out of it with a bad feeling. I am uniquely qualified to talk about this because Michigan's had 3 of those guys in the last 2 years, and Caleb Houston, Moussa Diabate, and Jett Howard. But Brenner gives off that vibe to me. He could have gone straight to Europe from Sao Paulo. His agents talked him into coming to MLS. From the moment he arrived, I felt like he regretted it. He never bought in. He couldn't wait to go to Europe. And he played just well enough to get his move, but I don't think he was any sort of transformative player in MLS.
But wait. The amount of money that he would have garnered in a transfer fee at the point that he left Brazil, you don't think it's that much of a difference?
Cincinnati are selling him for less money than they spent, and I think he's going to about the same level of club for about the same amount of money that he would have gone for had he gone straight from Sao Paulo to Europe.
And they can't all work out. We all understand that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a disaster,
Right.
but I just think it shouldn't be held up as some great success story. I'll be curious to see what the reaction is when that move actually goes down and what people say about it.
That's fair.
Elsewhere, you know the old adage that you throw out the records in rivalry games?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was on display in Portland because Seattle were flying. They went in there brimming with confidence. Portland were struggling, and lo and behold, Portland with a 4-1 win over Seattle. Seattle actually led 1-0 in the second half thanks to a Raul Ruiz-Diaz goal, but Portland exploded for 4 goals in the last 20 minutes. Asprilla, Fogasa, Niesgoed, and Mosquera. So the Timbers get a much-needed big win.
I mean, this is a typical type of MLS result. Now, to be fair, Portland has had some problems and injuries, and so maybe they weren't as bad as their record showed. But, of course, Portland beats Seattle because MLS, as we've talked about time and time again, is rooted in this structure that has manufactured parity. And we have the hierarchy that has happened, but again, it is the most unpredictable league in the world and a place where anyone can win each and every game. And I'm not saying there hasn't been a separation, but certainly, as I said, relative to everywhere else in the world, that parity exists. And I love the fact that this is a type of league where this can happen. And it's amazing how many people have come up to me and said that is specifically what they like about following their MLS team and following Major League Soccer. And it would apply to USL or NWSL also, is that it has been manufactured so you do have that opportunity to win. And you do have that every season, you have that hope. It doesn't always, work out, but at least you have that hope, as opposed to others where you know exactly what your lot in life is when it comes to it. I want to read you Smetcher's quote. We love Brian Smetzer here on the State of the Union, and I know he listens. He said after the game. He said, "It doesn't feel like a rivalry. After the game, some of our staff members." There's everybody talking and laughing. It's like another loss. It's not another loss. It's against the Timbers. We have to get back this. All of us have to get back to understanding that this is a rivalry. So Schmetzer not happy with the result, nor should he be, because they came in flying. They were, arguably one of the best teams in the league, and they went into, as I said, it might not be a fair characterization, but just on record, one of the poorest teams when it comes to Portland, and Portland smashed them. And so maybe this is a punch in the face that the Seattle team kind of needed. And I think that's probably how Brian is going to use this going forward.
Columbus, New England, entertaining game that confirmed that these are both very good teams. New England led 1-0 late, and then Columbus equalized 90+8, so it finished 1-1. Bruce Arena not happy with the amount of stoppage time.
Speaking of pissed off coaches, hey, there's Bruce Arena. Yeah, okay, I get it. Listen, you're hanging on. You have a red card, and so this is your opportunity to say, "Hey, we went and stole 3 points in a very difficult environment in Columbus against a very, very good team." And Columbus just came back and back and back. They even had a goal called back, and then they still came back and found a way ultimately and to salvage that point. And If you would ask Bruce Arena, I'll give you 1-1 before the game, of course he would have said yes, no problem. But the way that the game came, and there was on offer that opportunity to get 3 points. And then, look, the timing issues in soccer, we know that it is still so subjective that any coach, and certainly a legendary coach that has been in the game long enough, can understand that there's no way to tell exactly what it is. And ultimately it is left to one person with that watch, and yes, they take into account substitutions and goals and all that kind of stuff, but it's arbitrary, and it is, like I said, subjective to this human being. Just defend better. I mean, you've been defending that entire time. Figure out a way to defend in that last couple of seconds, and don't let that happen. And so, Bruce Arena, because of the big personality that he is, when he gets angry and he screams and yells, there's plenty of people that eat that up, including myself. I love it when Bruce Arena screams and yells. Not because he's necessarily right. It's just fun to see him get pissed off about things. And if you're a Revolution fan, I think, yes, there's a part of you that says, I completely agree, we should feel aggrieved for not having been given that opportunity, and the clock or the referee screwed us here. But just get on with it and defend better.
We have an Ask Alexi question on who is the greatest U.S. men's national team manager. So I'll be curious to see if you evoke Bruce Arena in that conversation as well. San Jose, 3-0 win over SKC. Espinoza and Abobasi twice, but the story here is SKC.
Yep.
Just 2 goals in their first 8 games. That's a MLS record for futility. I know you love Peter Vermes. I have a lot of time for him as well, but some people are wondering, they're making the Arsene Wenger Arsenal comparison. Also a legendary coach who perhaps overstayed his welcome.
Yep.
What do you make of the Vermes situation right now?
We mentioned that because of his longevity and because of his quality, let's be honest, which is why he has that longevity, he was going to be given as long a leash as there is. And I think that that's fair and right to do for someone like that. And I want to talk about Janet Jackson, what have you done for me lately and everything. But, this is a legend when it comes to Kansas City and not just the game, but obviously the club. And he has built it and has amassed incredible amount of power. But that only gets you so far. And yes, I think that it is a good type of parallel talking about someone like Arsene Wenger, where that leash eventually it runs out. And this is a bad look. Now, he just signed a new deal, and he certainly there's a kind of a soft landing type of situation that could happen here where he could step back into a sporting director type of role, and maybe fresh eyes and a fresh approach is exactly what this team needs. But they haven't responded, and now you've been given chances that are fair to who you are, and more chances than many others would have been given. And so, yeah. By the way, this doesn't change my opinion about the quality of Peter Vermes. But as a head coach in this situation, in this moment for this team, this is a failure. And there's only one person, and it is on Peter Vermes right now. So, yeah, I mean, this is, you keep thinking they're going to come out of this. They're going to find a way out. They can't find their way out. And I don't know if they are going to.
And finally, El Tráfico, LAFC, 3-2 winners at Dignity Health Sports Park. Vela scores twice. Hollingshead on target as well. Boyd and Delgado got the Galaxy goals. The Galaxy gave a decent account of themselves, but still winless after 7 games, and they suffered their first ever home defeat to LAFC.
Yeah, so if the Galaxy had just been, in it and winning games and still, in playoff contention and all that, this is context. Greg Vanny loves to talk about context, right? So you would have said, hey, this was a really good game, and a better team won, but the Galaxy gave a good account of themselves. The Galaxy doesn't need moral victories. The Galaxy doesn't need to say, hey, we played well. Hey, we gave them a game. Galaxy doesn't need that. The Galaxy needs what Cincinnati had been doing, to just grind out and find a way to get a win. It can be as ugly as you possibly want. By the way, I went to the game, so I actually saw the environment. A lot of LAFC fans, not just in the actual section, but sprinkled out throughout the Dignity Health there. There were a lot of LAFC fans, and we know that the protest continues to go on. The banners were flying around constantly of Klein out, Karofsky out, hashtagging it and doing all that kind of stuff. And it was obvious that something was missing from an organized supporters fan group standpoint, in that the fan groups for the Galaxy were not there, and therefore it wasn't on cue, and it wasn't organized, and it certainly wasn't loud, and LAFC absolutely drowned them out. And then the actual play on the field. Ricky Puig, he's a good player. Dare I say a great player? But he is a man out of time, in that, as good as he is wrong for this team. He's too good for what this LA Galaxy team is, and that is also, by the way, on the leadership. To bring in someone like this, unless you're going to surround him with people that are thinking about the game in the same way, not only is it not going to go well, but it actually works against you. The types of things that he does and the way that he wants to play is impossible for this Galaxy team to play. And look, your Klinsmann is not a great goalkeeper relative to MLS. You're starting a teenager in the back. The Galaxy contrived off their own throw-in, okay, to turn it into not just an opportunity, but ultimately a penalty and a goal for LAFC. Is that on Chris Klein? I mean, and again, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be changes here, but scream and yell and protest. This is on Greg Vanney, and it wasn't ultimately good enough. And you give Vela a gift, by the way, in the worst possible place that you can put Carlos Vela, out there on the right with no pressure on him, with his left foot to be able to curl it around. It doesn't matter, and that's not on Klinsmann. That's just the reality of how good Carlos Vela is. And then you give them another gift. And so these are just unforced errors, and that ultimately lead to a situation where what was bad is only gotten worse. And Chicharito was non-existent.
And how about that Vanney rant ahead of the match? That was extraordinary.
Yeah, I went on the Apple show, the 360 show, and with the likes of our friend and colleague Sasha Kleshin and others there. And Sasha earlier had talked about the Greg Vanney situation, and I think he took the words right out of my mouth in that it came off whiny. It came off weak. And I get what he's trying to say, and for those that didn't hear it, it was, a expletive-laden pushback at the realities that he and the Galaxy have had to face over the last couple of years. And, constantly saying, well, if this call had gone our way and the VAR had come in here and if this goal, that nobody cares. Nobody cares. Your job is to win. Your job as the head coach of the LA Galaxy is to find a way to win. And so you can bring in what you think is context, but even then, it just looked like excuses for why things ultimately didn't go your way. And I'm not saying that there aren't things that aren't legitimate to bring up, but there's plenty of talent, all right? You're not elite, I get it, but there's still plenty of talent to be doing better than you are doing right now. And this is, this was a result that the Galaxy could ill afford to have, and Greg Vanney in particular.
Incidentally, the producer of Apple's 360 show, as you know, is a good friend of mine. He worked at Fox for many years. He was a big fan of your appearance. He texted me some very complimentary things. Yeah,
I had a good time. I came on. I had opened up a bottle of wine, and I was watching them for the hours and hours and hours, and that's not easy for all of them. Kalen Kyle and Bradley Wright Phillips, and everybody they work very, very hard on hours and hours and hours, and so we had a good time. I'm glad that they brought me on, and it was obviously to pump up El Tráfico, but also to talk about what's going on. And so, yeah, it was a fun day out. Rob Stone joined me yesterday, and it was a fun game to go to just to watch if you are a neutral. But if you're a Galaxy fan, this is more of the same. I wonder how much it costs to have one of those planes fly around all day with your signage. In this case, it was Klein out and Karofsky out. What do you think? Thousands of dollars, you think?
Depends how long the names are. Karofsky's a pretty long name, so you got to...
You're paid by the letter? I don't know. All right, what else, Mosse?
LAFC fighting on multiple fronts. They're also in the CCL semis. On our last podcast, we mentioned that LAFC and León had been the first two teams to book their place in the semifinals. Then that Wednesday evening, Philadelphia went to Guadalajara, got a 2-2 draw against Atlas, which meant a 3-2 aggregate triumph. This match ensuring that nobody in Philadelphia will ever complain about VAR again, because both their goals scored by Carranza were initially waved off. The flag went up, and then VAR reviewed it and saw that both were clearly onside. The first one was an embarrassing mistake by the linesman.
I mean, are we done with CONCACAFing? Is it done? Is like that whole thing because of technology and VAR now a thing of the past? I mean, am I going to get sentimental about the times when people used to get screwed by, either calls or non-calls or stuff that can't be taken back? I don't know. But yeah, it corrected glaring mistakes, which is what it's there to do. So if you want to live in that world where everything is fixed, then okay, we're living in it.
And then Thursday evening, Tigres, in their first match under new manager Robert Ciboldi, they hammered Motagua 5-0 to complete a 6-0 aggregate triumph. Gignac with 2 goals in that second leg. Although if you're worried about a new manager bounce, they then promptly drew 0-0 away to Querétaro at the weekend. So all is not right in Tigres' world. But nevertheless, they're off to the semis. So we have one all-Mexican semi, Tigres León, and one all-MLS, Philadelphia LAFC. The order of the legs determined by teams' performances in the previous rounds. So Tigres will host the first leg, León the second leg. Philadelphia will host the first leg, LAFC the second leg. So those are your CCL semis.
I'm excited about this, and obviously it's a rematch of MLS Cup. And also, not arguably, I think the two best teams from last year. And why I'm also excited is that in the interim, oftentimes, you qualify for these tournaments, and things can drastically change. Your fortunes, injuries, selling of players, bringing in of players. And so the teams that you see that are reaping the benefits ultimately months later may look very, very different. I'm excited that two of the great teams from last year are also using that opportunity to be great months later, and that type of consistency we don't always see that. Now I know Philly has struggled on the domestic front, but we've talked about that before, and LAFC is flying right now.
So who would you pick in those two?
I'm still going to pick LAFC. Yeah, I think that they're ultimately a better team.
Yeah, I'm going with LAFC and Tigres, which would be a rematch of the 2020 CCL final, which LAFC led with 15 minutes left, and then Tigres scored twice to take it.
I went to that. That was in Orlando.
Correct.
During the pandemic. I was staying down in South Florida there, and I drove up for the game, and they were nice enough to let me in and quarantine me away in a little sequestered area there, and I watched that crazy game because it was in the palm of Bob Bradley and LAFC's hand, and they pissed it away.
We shift to England, where there was a major development in the title race this past weekend. First, Manchester City took care of their business on Saturday, 3-1 home win over Leicester. Erling Haaland on target twice. He's now up to 32 Premier League goals, which equals Mo Salah's record for a 38-game season.
And that's all-time Premier League, right?
Yes.
So from the beginning of the Premier League.
Well, it used to be 42 games, so the record is actually 34. He'll break that too,
yeah.
But a lot of people frame it as if, because it's now 38 games, they think the real record now that he's going for is this 38-game record that Salah set.
I mean, either way, it's incredible.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say he breaks Mo Salah's record. They're tied right now. I think he will score another Premier League goal before the end of the season.
I mean, this game, first off, Leicester City's in trouble, okay? And somebody had asked me about Leicester, and sometimes we take for granted what they did and that incredible season. But, they built up and they came up and, were so that they are potentially a yo-yo type of team shouldn't necessarily be a surprise, but they have, for the last less than a decade here, punched above their weight in a sense. Doesn't make it any more palatable or anything what's going on right now. And Man City, this was with a smoke and a coffee, and I know it's 3-1, but they did the damage early and they were ruthless. They got that lead, and then they sat back and made 5 changes, and it wasn't even a game at a certain point.
Then Sunday, Arsenal were away to West Ham, and they looked pretty ruthless themselves early on. They jumped out to a quick 2-0 lead on goals by Jesus and Odegaard. But they somehow fell apart after that. West Ham pulled one back from the penalty spot before halftime. And then early in the second half, Saka missed a penalty that would have restored their 2-goal advantage. And Jared Bowen promptly equalized. It ended 2-2. We've talked about this. The math was such that Arsenal didn't necessarily need to implode for City to win the title, but they might just implode anyway and make it easier on City.
I mean, everyone from Piers Morgan on down from Arsenal fans here were very adamant that you are pissing this away in real time as they were watching this happen. And when I say this, I mean the title. And we've talked over the last couple of weeks about the actual numbers and the games in hand and the games against each other. And you're assuming, and that's a huge assumption still to make, that Man City is going to win out, but they are on the front foot right now. And the way that Arsenal, even after the game, the way that they talked, I feel like they're trying to convince themselves more so that this is okay and this happens and we will figure this out. But I mean, this is not good from an Arsenal perspective. And who knows? We've said this now, but they might have just pissed us away.
Yeah, Arsenal now with a 4-point lead, but City have a game in hand, and it's going to go to 7 because Arsenal are home to Southampton on Friday, a game they should win, and then City play their FA Cup semi-final that weekend, so they're off in terms of the Premier League. So Arsenal are probably going to have a 7-point lead, and City have 2 games in hand. So it's going to be a little funky because you're going to look at the table, and it's going to seem like Arsenal are in good shape, but we're all factoring in that the way City are playing, that they're going to win those games in hand, and so they now have the upper hand if you assume they're going to take care of their business.
All right. Anything else?
In Germany, on the topic of teams being flaky in title races, let me get the non-Gio Reyna part out of the way first, and then we can hone in on Gio Reyna. Bayern held to a 1-1 draw at home by Hoffenheim, so that opened the door for Dortmund. Had they won their match, they would have been level on points with Bayern. Dortmund had a 2-0 lead and a man advantage late in the second half against 16th place Stuttgart. They somehow allowed Stuttgart to score twice, but then Dortmund retook the lead in stoppage time, so you think, okay, they're going to get away with it. But then Stuttgart go back down the other way, at the death, score again, 3-3 final, so Dortmund remain 2 points back of Bayern. Let me say this. The main reason why Bayern Munich have won 10 straight Bundesliga titles is because of how good they are. But it does help that their chief competitor is the flakiest club in world football. Even by Dortmund standards, this was astonishing.
This was astonishing. I mean, so much so that I'm jumping around to different games and different leagues on a weekend, but I can watch multiple screens here or there, but you started to hear what was going on, and I immediately went to it. And this was, in the moment, it's insane, and yet to your point, it shouldn't be a surprise to any of us that this is happening when it comes to Dortmund, and it was nuts. I mean, the only silver lining is the Gio Reyna from a U.S. perspective looking at this. But again, this might have been the moment, if you needed a moment, and there have been a couple of them, when Dortmund said, no, it's okay, you guys can go on and win. We knocked on the door a little bit, but there's nobody home, so we're going to go home.
So as I mentioned, after surrendering a 2-goal lead, Dortmund reclaimed the advantage with a goal in stoppage time. That goal was scored by Gio Reyna, his 6th Bundesliga goal of the campaign. He has shown this penchant for coming on late and scoring goals. U.S. fans connecting this one to that run of goals he had right after the World Cup. So if you look at his goals per minutes played this season, is actually quite good. A lot of U.S. fans using that as an argument that he should be playing more. What do you think?
He's a really good substitute. I mean, he's proven it, and I think he deserves obviously praise and credit for continuing to do this despite all of the craziness. We talked to Doug McIntyre earlier in the show, about the situation, and the summer's going to come, and there will be, I think, a lot of talks, because this can't be his lot going forward. I don't think he wants it to be, but to be fair to Gio Reyna, he's done everything that has been asked of him as a substitute on a continual basis, and that they look down that bench and immediately point to him, and he comes in and delivers. I think that says a lot about the quality of the player, his technical and physical attributes that he utilizes, but also the mentality. And this is also a player that we always kind of talk about, kind of looking like he's sulking and he's not happy about stuff. And some of that is, I don't think fair, because it's body language, and that's not always really what someone's thinking. But he's gotten on with it, and he's come in each and every time and ultimately done his job. I mean, he handed the opportunity to get out of that mess to Dortmund, and then he, along with the rest of the team, squandered that opportunity. But I think if anybody is looking good right now from a Dortmund perspective, and it's not a lot, I guess it would be Gio Reyna in terms of his impact that he is making. He'd like to start, but I don't know. I still don't think necessarily that this means that he should be a starter for Dortmund going forward.
And then this week we have the Champions League quarterfinal second legs on Tuesday. The one tie that I think is still very much in the balance, Napoli, AC Milan. AC Milan with a 1-0 aggregate lead. Napoli back home. It sounds like they're going to get Osimhen back, who missed the first leg, so they're going to try to overturn that 1-0 deficit. The only thing I'll say is Mike Maignan, the AC Milan goalkeeper, might be the most informed keeper in the world right now. He made some incredible saves in that first leg. We did that Republic of Ireland-France Euro qualifier recently where he made a couple of mind-boggling saves to help France win that game, so they're going to have to put the ball past him. What do you think? Can Napoli do this?
Yes, I think they can do it. And Osimhen played this weekend right?
Yep.
So that I mean, because it's one thing to say he's available. It's another thing to actually have seen
Right,
him back.
right,
on the
right.
I mean, he smashed that one off the crossbar. Right? Look, he is a game changer. This is, yeah. I think they do it. I think Napoli comes in, and I also think that his presence, I think, lifts everybody around him, and they feel that they are a different team with him on the field.
Also Tuesday, Chelsea at home against Real Madrid. Real Madrid with a 2-0 aggregate lead, which is not a crazy hill to climb, but the way Chelsea are playing, they lost again to Brighton at the weekend. I find it very improbable that they're going to turn this around against Real Madrid.
Yeah, I think that there is this sentiment that these eggs, all of these eggs in this basket right now, that the Chelsea's too good not to have a big game, and I think a lot of people are pointing to that this is when it happens. I don't think so. I think they roll over, and I think Real Madrid wins easily.
Then Wednesday, Inter back home with a 2-0 lead over Benfica. Benfica lost again at the weekend. That's now 3 straight defeats in all competitions after they had only lost once all season prior to that. So this what was being hailed as a historic season is suddenly unraveling at the worst time. So I think Inter finished.
And they got to go to
here.
Milan, right?
Yes.
That's not happening.
And then Bayern Munich back home trying to overturn a 3-0 deficit against Manchester City. Pep is talking up the fact that you can't count out Bayern, that this Sadio Mane, Leroy Sané fight is going to have a galvanizing effect on that team. But I think City should move on here.
Yeah. I mean, on the surface, it looks done and dusted, right? I think I heard our friend Eric Winaldo the other day saying that he still thinks that Bayern Munich will have a say in this. I tend to, as much as it hurts me, I tend to agree with him on this. I think there's something still there. I can't quit you, Bayern. I just can't quit you.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right.
Maybe an early goal will get the crowd going. You never know.
Maybe. Anything else?
That's it.
And that's Tuesday and Wednesday. Okay. So by the time you're listening to this, maybe you're watching it, and then obviously Wednesday, and we'll talk about all these games and these results later on in the week. Anything else, Mosse?
That's it.
All right, let's take another quick break. When we come back, it's time for Ask Alexi. Don't go anywhere. Okay, welcome back. It's time for Ask Alexi, that part of the show. We send in your questions here on all the social media platforms using that hashtag Ask Alexi. And keep in mind that our handle out there on all those platforms is SOTU with Alexi. Or you can call into our State of the Union podcast hotline, which is 657-549-2297. What do we got this week, Mosse?
We've got a voicemail. Let's take a listen right now.
Hi, Alexi. Hi, Mosse. This is Harvey from Dallas. Hope y'all are doing well. Who would you say is the best coach in men's national team history? What made them so good? Thanks. Bye.
Okay. Well, thank you, Harvey, for calling in on the hotline. That's an interesting. Let's just go. Let's do some numbers here. Okay. So Gregg Berhalter has a 71.67% win average, right? And that's the highest of any coach. And look, I'm not doing the ones that have coached 2 games and stuff like that, but the people you know. Bruce Arena, by the way, for comparison, is a 66.55. Jurgen Klinsmann, 64.29. Bob Bradley, 61.25. Steve Sampson, 53.23. And Bora Milutinovic, 47.40. Bob Gansler, let's go back. So from basically the return to the World Cup in '90 forward, Bob Gansler was a 48.65. I think I am going to go with Bruce Arena, and for a number of different reasons. Now, while Gregg Berhalter has a higher win percentage, when it comes to what Bruce did, keep in mind that a handball away from going to a semifinal in the World Cup back in 2002. And look, the soccer gods can smile upon you, and you can find a pathway through, and that can happen. But Bruce also did this at a time that is very different, more than 20 years ago. The landscape of soccer was very, very different. The resources, the depth, the talent pool, and everything from Major League Soccer to the pathways now to Europe, all of those things were still kind of in the infancy. And Bruce Arena, I think, in that moment, in what would be his greatest moment in the World Cup, showed the ability to bring together a team where you had players like let's say, a Jeff Agoos, who had been around, or players like Kobe Jones, be better than they had been, maybe even arguably the best they'd ever been. A guy like Kobe Jones accept and really embrace a substitute role and an effective type of substitute to come in, like a Kobe Jones. Populate the team with some badass SOBs, Pablo Mastriani's, these types of players. Populate the team with young upstarts, with the likes of Landon Donovan and DeMarcus Beasley. Bring back a trio of goalies that have competed for now over a decade in Casey Keller and Brad Friedel and Tony Meola, for that matter. So I think that shows great man management. And ultimately, I think that team, it should have been no surprise that they were successful because of the makeup of that. Now we know what Bruce Arena has done, because it's not just about the World Cup, but ultimately, let's be honest, that's what you are judged on for the most part. And so getting out of the group, even at that point, was not necessarily something to pat yourself on the back for. We had done that before, but obviously to get that far, and within that process, not for nothing, but to beat Mexico in a World Cup, 2-0. I was walking out of the Dignity Health, and there were some fans walking the other way, and they said hi, and then they walked on, and they turned back around and said, Viva Mexico, right? And of course, I turned to them and said, 2-0, como siempre, right? So it still lives in the folklore and the mythology of American soccer, and that's because of what Bruce Arena and that team did. So I think, and best is subjective, right? But I think that still Bruce Arena has been the best U.S. men's national team coach in history for a number of the reasons that I said. What do you think, Mosse?
I was hoping you would break the internet by saying Gregg Berhalter.
Hey, I mean, if I had to rank them, then I think he goes second. And it's only because he hasn't had, while he had a World Cup moment and did what basically every other World Cup coach has done other than Bruce Arena. If he had gone farther, then I think that there is an argument. But World Cup trumps all. And I know it might not be necessarily fair, but this is the gig that you're taking, is ultimately, in the case of all these guys, to get the team to the World Cup and to do well in a World Cup.
To what degree does the failing to qualify in 2018 hurt Bruce's legacy? It's a question Brazilians grapple with Scolari, too. Won the World Cup in 2002, but presided over the 7-1 in 2014.
Yeah, it tarnishes Bruce a little bit, but he already had that moment. And so, and he was coming in to clean a mess. Bruce loves to tell people about how he loves to clean up messes. He loves to tell me, I came and cleaned your mess up at the Galaxy. And look, he did. And he did great things with the Galaxy. And he was asked to come and clean up the mess that was there, or the potential mess that was coming from Jurgen Klinsmann, and he failed. And that's always going to be part of his legacy. But I don't think that it tarnishes it enough where I wouldn't name him as my best national team coach.
Next up, we have a Twitter question. Matt Skinner. Alexi, what are your thoughts on some of the original clubs in MLS, Galaxy, Colorado, Red Bulls, etc., falling behind the newer sides, Cincinnati, LAFC, Atlanta, Austin? Do you think these clubs can ever captivate and entertain at the same level, and if so, how?
Yeah, so I got this question today coming in, and it's something that I think about, and I've talked about it before, but you have this, as we get closer to almost 30 years of existence, with all of the expansion and almost 30 teams coming in Major League Soccer, and all of this incredible expansion that we've had, where you have this nouveau riche set that has come in, and then these OGs, which is what Matt is talking about here. And some of the OGs have continued on, and the best ones have understood that it's not 1996 anymore, and what worked from a business perspective off the field, or a competitive perspective on the field back then or in the early aughts, does not work right now. And so they have had to, and many have done so willingly and successfully, evolve and change to keep up or to get left behind. As I said, some have and some haven't. But there's also the part where these new teams that have come in, these new MLS teams, they have benefited from all of these older clubs and all of that intrinsic knowledge and history and experience, all of the successes and all of the failures and all of the mistakes and all of those best practices that have been amassed. Now, they pay a whole lot more to come into the league, but they are also given this kind of playbook and history to be able to go through and to see what works, what doesn't work, and not make the same mistakes twice. And in a sense, on the shoulders of greatness, they have found ways to do that. And unfortunately, some of those teams, while they have been those shoulders to push other teams to greatness, they haven't also been pulled up or pulled themselves up to keep up. So just because you are an OG type of MLS team doesn't mean that you can't keep up, that you can't change. But you do have to have people in place that recognize that you got to be able to think about the game in a very different way. And things can get things can get stale very, very easily. And if you don't have the understanding that if you're not growing, you're failing, then you are going to find yourself in trouble. And it does irritate me because I want to give reverence. I want to give respect to these teams that ultimately built this platform, built this league, and these ownership groups and these communities and these fans. And it hurts me that in some cases they have not been able to keep up. But as I always say, Mosse, what have you done for me lately? Janet Jackson, it applies here. And you cannot rest on your laurels. You cannot live off of the past. But I do think that there has to be some recognition that it is, even though you're paying more, it is easier to come in now and be successful than to have started at the very beginning. And that might not always make sense, but I think that it is true. And it's because of all of that work and, to be quite honest, some of the mistakes that have been made in the past. But it doesn't give you, it's not an excuse for you not keeping up if you are one of those OGs. And ultimately, fans aren't going to care that you were around in 1996. It's all fine and well, and you can put it on memorabilia and your jersey and stuff like that. But it's about 2023. What are you doing in 2023 to be the best? And if you're using what has come over the last 30 years, that's all fine and well. But if you're just trying to do the same thing and it's not working out in 2023, but it worked out back in 2000 or it worked back in 1996, then that's on you.
For those of us watching us right now rather than listening,
yes.
How about this image over here?
So, yeah, I just wanted to point this out, not because it's two glorious representations and works of art, if you will, from Dariush, who tweeted the State of the Union. So first off, the fact that he's interacting with our State of the Union account here on Twitter and myself, and that he is an avid watcher of the pod, that would be enough in itself to celebrate. But he also made this thing, and this is a before after. And the only reason I wanted to have it visually, if you're not watching it, it is a picture of me back in, the 94 with all of the hair and the denim and all that, with my arms around the version of me today, which is obviously much more clean cut. And I get a lot of questions about my aesthetic and how it has changed over time, and am I a different person? Well, I think we're all different people, especially over 20 or 30 years. In a lifetime. I like to say that I cleaned up on the outside, but I'm still a mess on the inside. Now there are those that say that one of me is already too much, and two of me, let alone in art form, is way out of bounds here. But I appreciate Darius doing this. I wanted to show it to the people out there. What do you think, Mosse?
You look older in the younger picture.
I get this a lot too, and my aesthetic, it was cultivated through music, and I knew, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again. Back in the day, if you will, back in the 1900s, when I was running around with a lot more hair and that look, it was because I felt comfortable in it, but it was also a costume. that I put on, and I knew how that was going to play and how it was going to react, and it comes from, like I said, music and all that. But I also knew that it was finite. You couldn't continue to do that. And so in a strange way, looking older back then was to my benefit. I was more intimidating, and I looked more mature than I actually was on and off the field. And then when I needed to kind of shed some years and try to look a little bit younger, if you will, it was ready-made to just shave and be more clean-cut. Now, there are plenty of people that prefer that. Would that I could still grow that type of hair, then maybe I would. But I'm good with the new version of me. And it's still all me, whether you believe it or not. I haven't changed a lot over the years. Anything else, Mosse?
That's it.
All right, let's take another quick break, and when we come back, I'll give you my one for the road. Okay, welcome back. It is the end of the show, and at the end of each and every show, I give you my one for the road. We let this story kind of play out last week, and now we have some kind of closure, if you will, in terms of the decisions that have been made, and that is the situation that happened last week at the Red Bulls game with Dante Van Zier, the designated player, the Belgian who plays for the New York Red Bulls in the game against the San Jose Earthquakes. In the moment during the game, there was a huge uproar that happened on the field, and we come to find out that first there was an accusation that Van Zier had made a racial slur in this back and forth between the two teams. The investigation happens on the field by the actual officials that are there, and if they can determine something in the moment, then the appropriate action is taken. They couldn't do it in the moment. Van Zier continued on in the game. The investigation continued after the game, and we come to find out days later that Dante Van Zier puts out a public statement and says and admits that this was something that he did. He was swiftly given a 6-game ban for his actions on the field. There have since been protests when it comes to the fans, the Red Bull fans, and even this weekend in their follow-up game as to continuing on with this player, given the actions and the racial slur that occurred, and that now has been admitted to by the player and the club, and to Gerhard Struber, the head coach of the Red Bulls, for his actions in the moment, continuing to keep the player on the field and not taking him off the field at that time. You know, that one I can understand, because you want to be fair to your player, and at that point I'm sure that there's information flying all over the place, and we from the outside certainly can look and try to lip read and again try to understand what was happening in that moment. But the question is right now, and the discussion is right now, and I mentioned Sasha Kleshtin and Bradley Wright Phillips, who were on the show this week, and I thought they did a really good job of talking about this obviously very, very serious situation, and their belief as to whether this was appropriate punishment. I believe that this is appropriate punishment. I believe that the time was taken to make sure that it was appropriate in what was going on. This is going to follow Van Zier. So it's easy to say, well, he should never play again, or he should just get rid of him. Okay, that's fine. That's certainly one way to go. But Dante Van Zier is now going to have to deal with this, not just for the rest of his career, but for the rest of his life, because every time that you pull up his name, this story is now going to be associated with him. And I'm not crying for Van Zier at all. He created this situation, and he is going to have to deal with the repercussions of it, not just now in terms of the 6-game ban, but continuing on. He's going to have to come back into that locker room, and if he can, regain the trust and the respect of his teammates after doing a vile and despicable type of thing on the field. And I don't know if he is going to be able to do that. But obviously, I think that the men and women in Major League Soccer that were consulted and ultimately came to this decision recognize that they want to give him that chance. And in that, I think that there is some benevolence and there is some mercy, if you will. But it's not assured that this is going to happen. And the seriousness that was taken with this, I think, is appropriate. And I think ultimately that this is going to, unfortunately, but it has to happen, continue to send the message. And it's easy to say, well, I can't. Why are we having to continue to send this message? Because we still live, unfortunately, in times where people think that this is appropriate. And until people understand from the get-go, and I say people, it's not just players, it's people in general, but certainly if you're talking about players, understand that this is inappropriate and this is not something that we do, then unfortunately we're going to have to continue to do the things that state unequivocally we will not deal with this, and there will be harsh punishment. There are plenty that feel that this is not harsh enough. And certainly had it been a 10-game ban or who knows, a season-long ban, I don't think anybody would have come out and said that is unacceptable or that is over the top. But I'm sure that Dante van Zier now, when he gets up each and every day, would love to be able to take back that moment, because this is something, like I said, is a scarlet letter, if you will, that is going to follow him around forever. And it should. It doesn't mean that he can't be a good person. It doesn't mean that he can't do the things, and he's certainly going to do the things off the field, to better understand not just that what he did is wrong, but why it is wrong. And I hope that he ultimately does. And I hope that he can continue on with his career, whether it's with the Red Bulls in Major League Soccer or not. I don't know. But, this is unfortunately yet another example in a world, and certainly in a game, where there are too many examples. And Sasha Kleshin talked about his former teammate Romelu Lukaku and everything that he is dealing with on a consistent basis. And so, unfortunately, it is not dissipating, and certainly not to the degree that we would all hope and want to have happen. And so when there are moments like this, yes, you have to take the time to make sure that you are 100% sure that what happened. And then, as happened in this case, once that is done through that investigation, make sure that you do the things to show the player and all the other players and everybody else involved that this will not be tolerated going forward. So I hope that we don't have to deal with other incidents like this, and I certainly hope we never have to deal with Dante van Zier again in a situation like this, and that he takes the time to understand not just that he did something wrong, but why he did something wrong. Mosse?
It's interesting that you mentioned some people don't think the punishment is sufficient. The Red Bull supporters are among those, and they're staging protests. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. We've talked about the Galaxy protests. That's for something more mundane, not winning enough matches. This is something a lot more serious. So that's an interesting dynamic with the Red Bulls and their own fans.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually, it's not a bad thing. It's actually, I love the autonomy, and I love the ownership, and I love the responsibility of supporters and fans out there. And they are the lifeblood of any club. And certainly there's fan groups that maybe want more than they ultimately deserve. I don't think that's a case here. And if you disagree with something that is happening with, quote unquote, your club, you should make people aware of what's going on. And I think that's what's happening, as you mentioned, in very different ways in terms of what's being I can't keep up with sometimes the protests. I need like a Excel sheet out there. But it just shows me that people are invested. They're invested in their team. They're invested in this league. And when something like this happens, that is a black mark, not just on the player and on the people involved, but on the club, the fact that they are taking that personally, that's actually a good thing. That's a good thing that, the protest stems from. This is not who we want to be as a club. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily that things are going to change. They may, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to change. But you will have been heard, you will have been seen, you will have made your point as to what you expect from your product, which is the team, but much more so from this team that you know and love. So that's good, and there will be more. There will be more protests. Some organized, some legitimate, some probably not legitimate. Some that you might say, "Damn right, thumbs up, 100% support you," and some where you may say, "This is ridiculous, and I'm going to roll my eyes at it." But ultimately, I think it comes from a good place, in that you want your team to represent you in the best possible way. And I know that's subjective at times, but this is part of growing up. Anything else, Mosse?
That's it.
All right, listen, I hope you're having a good week, and we will be back again later on in this week. As Mosse mentioned, there's Champions League going on, and a U.S.-Mexico game coming up later on this week. And we can poo-poo it all we want, but I'm still going to watch it. Our special thanks to Doug McIntyre for joining us this week and talking to us about all sorts of different things. We always love having him on. Definitely check out his work on a consistent basis when it comes to Fox. He's one of the great ones that we have and a wonderful resource that we have. We will talk to you again later on this week. Keep writing and sending your tweets and all the different messages and using that hashtag #AskAlexi out there. Keep sending in your questions when it comes to our State of the Union podcast hotline at 657-549-2297. We will talk again, like I said, later on this week. And until then, and as always, my friends, size the day.